The Devil's Wood, Part 1. The Return of the Detective. In the quiet town of Maple Ridge, the woods were always silent. The trees stood tall and strong, hiding many secrets. Most people in the town didn't worry about the woods. They had been safe for years. But that peace was broken one cold autumn morning. Sheriff Emma Miller sat at her desk, staring at a report. There had been another murder. The body was found deep in the woods, just like the others. The news sent shockwaves through the small town. It had been years since anyone had seen anything like this. The town was afraid, and Emma was nervous. She had only been sheriff for a year and had never dealt with anything so horrible. She picked up the phone. There was only one person who could help now. His name was Jack Thornton, a retired detective. He had been famous for solving many tough cases, including a string of brutal murders in Maple Ridge years ago. After those cases, Jack retired, deciding that he was done with crime. But Emma had no choice. She needed him. The phone rang. Emma's heart beat faster with each ring. Finally, Jack's voice came through the line. "Jack Thornton speaking. Detective Thornton, it's Sheriff Emma Miller from Maple Ridge," she said, her voice shaking slightly. I need your help. There's been another murder. Just like the ones you solved years ago. It's happening again." There was a long pause. Emma could hear Jack breathing on the other end of the line. Then he spoke slowly. "I retired for a reason, Sheriff. I left all that behind." "I know," Emma said, trying to keep her voice calm. "But this is different. I can't do this alone. Please, Jack. We need you." Jack thought for a moment. He remembered those cases, the dark, terrifying times when the murders seemed endless. He had worked hard to solve them, but the memories still haunted him. Yet, he couldn't ignore the pain in Emma's voice. He knew she was in over her head. Finally, Jack sighed. "All right, I'll be there tomorrow morning. We'll see what's going on." The next day, Jack arrived in Maple Ridge. He was older now, his face lined with years of hard work and hard living. He had lived through enough to know when something was wrong. And something was definitely wrong in Maple Ridge. Emma met him at the police station. She looked relieved but worried. "Thank you for coming, Jack." Jack nodded but didn't smile. "Let's see the scene," he said, his voice serious. They drove out to the woods. The road was bumpy, the trees thick on both sides, hiding the dark secret within. The forest seemed to be watching them, the wind whispering through the leaves. When they reached the area where the body had been found, Emma stopped the car. They got out and walked to the edge of the woods. The police had already marked off the area with yellow tape. Jack looked at the spot where the body had been discovered. The trees above were tall and thick, and the ground was covered in leaves. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood on the ground. It was as if the person had just fallen dead. But Jack knew better. Murders were rarely that clean. "Where's the body?" Jack asked, his sharp eyes scanning the area. Emma led him to a small clearing nearby. The body had been removed, but the ground was still disturbed. "They found the body lying here," she said. It was a man, middle-aged. No identification on him. Just like the others. Jack crouched down and looked at the ground. There were no footprints. The area around the body was almost too perfect, like someone had carefully cleaned it. Jack frowned. "This doesn't look like a human did this." "What do you mean?" Emma asked, her voice filled with confusion. Jack stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the trees. This wasn't just a murder. Someone wanted this place to look untouched, like they were hiding something. Emma felt a cold shiver run through her, but she didn't show it. "You think it's someone from the town?" "I think it's something else," Jack said quietly, his voice low. "And I think it's been happening for longer than we realize." Emma felt the weight of his words. She had never thought of anything more than a human killer. But now, she wasn't so sure. As they walked back to the car, Emma noticed that the wind had picked up. The trees above them creaked in the breeze, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than before. It was as if the woods were alive, watching them, waiting for them to uncover whatever secret they hid. Jack knew that something dark was at work here, and he had a feeling that the real mystery was just beginning. But what was causing these deaths? And why were the woods hiding the truth? Tomorrow, they would search again. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the answer wouldn't be so simple this time. Something more sinister was lurking in the woods of Maple Ridge. And it was waiting for them. Part 2. The Hidden Secret. The next morning, Jack and Emma sat in the small-town diner, drinking coffee. The sun was shining brightly outside, but inside, the mood was heavy. The silence between them was thick with worry. They both knew that the woods weren't just hiding secrets. They were hiding something dangerous. Jack sipped his coffee, his mind already working through the details of the case. Emma watched him closely. She was still new to this, still trying to understand the world of crime, and especially the world of people like Jack. He had seen things she couldn't even imagine, things that left scars on the soul. How many murders like this have there been? Jack asked, setting his cup down gently on the table. 4. Emma replied. All in the woods, spread out over the last 2 weeks. The bodies. They're always found in places where it doesn't look like a fight happened. No sign of a struggle. No clear cause of death. Jack nodded slowly. That's odd. A killer wants to leave signs. They want you to know they were there so you can follow their trail. But here, it's like the killer's cleaning up after themselves, hiding everything. That's not normal. Emma was quiet for a moment. She was thinking, trying to make sense of what Jack said. So you think the killer is someone who knows how to cover their tracks? Someone who's smart, maybe even experienced? Jack looked out the window, staring at the trees in the distance. I think it's something more than just a person. Maybe it's not even a person at all. Emma blinked, surprised. What do you mean? You think it's something else? Jack didn't answer right away. He stood up, walking over to the window and staring at the woods. The trees were silent, watching them. It was hard to tell where the trees ended and the shadows began. Everything looked calm, peaceful, but there was something uneasy in the air. Do you believe in things that you can't explain? Jack asked, still looking out at the woods. Emma wasn't sure how to answer. She had always believed in logic, in facts, in things she could see and touch. But now, with everything that had been happening, she wasn't so sure anymore. I don't know. I've never really thought about it. But what are you suggesting, Jack? That this is some kind of monster? Jack turned to face her, his eyes serious. I don't know what it is yet, but I've seen things in my time that don't make sense. Things that don't belong in the world we know. Emma shook her head. I just can't believe that. It doesn't make sense. Jack smiled faintly, but it wasn't a warm smile. I didn't believe it either. Not until I saw it with my own eyes. Emma's curiosity grew. She had never heard Jack talk like this before. What did you see? What do you mean? Jack paused. He didn't want to tell her everything just yet. There were things in his past he didn't want to bring up. But now he didn't have a choice. I've seen things that make no sense. Things that couldn't be explained by any human. When you've seen enough death, you start to wonder. Maybe there's something more to this world than we realize. And the woods, they have their own story. They have their own secrets. Emma felt a chill run through her, though she didn't want to show it. She didn't want to think about anything that might make her believe in things she couldn't see. But she was beginning to wonder if Jack was right. There was something in those woods, something that didn't fit with any crime she had ever seen. All right, Emma said, her voice steady. What's the next step? What do we do now? Jack turned to look at her. His expression was serious, almost grave. We need to go into the woods. We need to see where the bodies were found and search for something, anything that doesn't belong. We need to understand the pattern. Are you sure about this? Emma asked. It could be dangerous. We don't know what we're up against. Jack looked at her with calm eyes. The more you stay away from the truth, the more dangerous it becomes. We need to find out what's hiding in those woods. They both stood up, ready to leave the diner. The cold air outside was a sharp reminder of the dark mystery waiting for them. They walked to the car, the silence between them thick with tension. Neither of them spoke, but both knew that they were about to step into something much darker than they had imagined. As they drove to the woods, the landscape around them began to change. The road became narrower, the trees more crowded. The shadows seemed to grow longer, stretching out across the road, as though the forest itself was trying to swallow them whole. When they reached the edge of the woods, Jack paused for a moment, looking at the thick trees. "This is where it all started," he said softly. "This is where we find the answers." Emma glanced at him, unsure of what to expect. They got out of the car and began walking into the forest. The trees were so tall they blocked out the sun, making it feel like evening even though it was only noon. As they walked deeper into the woods, Emma noticed something strange. There were no sounds of animals. No birds. No squirrels. Nothing. The silence was almost unnatural. The only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. It was as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. They reached the clearing where the last body had been found. The air here was cold, colder than anywhere else in the woods. Jack crouched down, studying the ground. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the earth. There were marks in the dirt, deep scratches that looked almost like claws. Emma knelt beside him. "What is that?" "It looks like something was dragged here." Jack nodded, his eyes dark with thought. "Whatever did this isn't human. We're not dealing with a killer. We're dealing with something different." Emma felt her heart race. She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. There was something in the woods, something not of this world, and it was hiding in the shadows, waiting for them to find it. Part 3. The Darkest Secret. The air in the woods felt thicker now. The trees loomed overhead, their twisted branches blocking out what little sunlight managed to peek through. Emma felt an uneasy tension in the air, as if the very forest was holding its breath, waiting for them to uncover something dark. Jack stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the area. He was no longer looking at the ground. Instead, he was watching the trees, the shadows, the way the leaves moved in the wind. There was a sense of alertness about him, something sharp and ready. Emma followed his gaze, but she saw nothing unusual. The woods appeared just as they always did, quiet, peaceful, and completely ordinary. "Something isn't right," Jack murmured, his voice low and thoughtful. Emma frowned. "What do you mean? We've only just started looking. Maybe it's just a regular killer hiding out here." Jack turned to face her, his expression grave. "This isn't a normal killer. There's something more going on. These woods, they've always been hiding something, and I think it's finally showing itself." Emma looked around nervously, trying to make sense of what Jack was saying. "You're scaring me, Jack. This doesn't make sense. I don't want to think there's something supernatural out here." Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he began walking toward a small hill just ahead of them. "Come on," he said. "I think we're getting close." Emma hesitated but followed him. The further they walked into the woods, the quieter it became. The silence was oppressive, as if the forest was keeping a secret they weren't meant to know. Emma had never felt this way before. She had always trusted logic, trusted facts. But now, she wasn't so sure. They reached the hill, and at the top, There was a strange clearing. The trees around it seemed older, their bark cracked and twisted, their roots exposed, crawling like fingers over the earth. There was something wrong about this place, something that made Emma's skin crawl. Jack stepped forward, crouching down to examine the ground. "This is it," he whispered. "This is where the pattern starts." Emma looked at the ground, and her eyes widened. The earth here was different. The soil was darker, almost black, and there were strange markings in the dirt. They didn't look like any animal tracks Emma had ever seen. They were sharp, almost like claws, digging into the ground, leaving deep, jagged lines. Jack stood up, his face serious. "These marks, they weren't made by any animal I know. And they weren't made by a human either." Emma looked around, her heart pounding. "What are you saying? That something else made these marks?" Jack didn't answer at first. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the trees, his eyes narrowing. Emma followed his gaze and gasped. In the distance, she saw something moving between the trunks, just out of reach. It was fast, too fast for a human, and it didn't make a sound. "Did you see that?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. Jack nodded, his jaw tight. "I saw it. We need to follow it." They hurried through the forest, their steps quick and urgent. Emma's heart was racing now. She didn't know what they were chasing, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't something human. The forest seemed to close in around them, its shadows growing longer as they moved deeper into the trees. They stopped at the edge of another clearing, and this time, Emma could see what Jack had been looking for. At the far end of the clearing, hidden between two large trees, was a strange structure. It was half buried in the ground, its wooden beams twisted and broken. It looked old, very old, and covered in moss and vines. Jack stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "This is it," he said quietly. "This is what I was afraid of." Emma stared at the structure, feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. "What is it? What does it mean?" Jack didn't answer immediately. He walked slowly toward the structure, brushing aside the thick vines and revealing more of the broken wood. As he touched the old beams, dust and dirt fell to the ground, and for the first time, Emma felt the weight of what they were standing in front of. "This," Jack said, his voice barely a whisper, "is the remains of an old cabin. It's been here for hundreds of years. And whoever or whatever has been using these woods has been using it for just as long." Emma's eyes widened. "But why didn't anyone ever find it before? Why is it hidden like this?" Jack turned to look at her, his face pale. "Because the people who lived here, they didn't want to be found." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and frightening. Emma's mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. Who had lived in this cabin? And why had they disappeared without a trace? Jack didn't explain further. Instead, he crouched down and began to dig through the dirt around the cabin. He was searching for something, though Emma didn't know what. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves above them. It was the only sound in the eerie silence of the woods. After a few minutes, Jack stopped. His hand had uncovered something small and round, buried in the dirt. He held it up, and Emma gasped. It was an old, rusted coin, covered in grime and dirt, but there was something strange about it. The coin had symbols on it, symbols that Emma didn't recognize. They were ancient, worn down by time, but still visible. Jack stared at the coin for a long moment, his expression darkening. "This is it," he said softly. "This is the key." Emma felt a chill run through her. The key to what? Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned toward the woods, his eyes scanning the shadows. "I don't know yet, but we're getting closer. The answer is here, in these woods. And it's more dangerous than anything we've seen before." They stood in silence for a moment, both of them feeling the weight of what was happening. Emma didn't know what they were up against, but she knew one thing for sure. The woods of Maple Ridge were hiding a secret, and that secret was darker than she could have ever imagined. Part 4. The Whispering Shadows. The woods felt heavier now, as if the trees themselves were closing in, watching Emma and Jack every step they took. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone in these woods. It was as if something unseen was following them, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Jack pocketed the strange coin and turned to Emma. His eyes were serious, but there was a hint of fear that Emma hadn't seen before. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice steady but tense. "The more we stay here, the more dangerous it gets." Emma nodded quickly, her mind racing. She had always believed in facts, in things she could see and touch, but now she was unsure of what to believe. The woods, the strange markings, the old cabin. Everything felt like it was leading them toward something bigger than either of them could understand. They moved through the forest carefully, stepping over tangled roots and under branches that reached out like fingers. Emma's thoughts kept circling back to the coin. What did it mean? Why had it been buried in the dirt? And why was it so important to Jack? She wanted to ask, but she could tell that Jack wasn't ready to explain yet. As they walked, the forest grew darker. The sun had already dipped behind the trees, leaving the woods shrouded in shadow. Emma felt the weight of the darkness pressing in on her. It wasn't just the absence of light that made it feel so heavy. It was the way the darkness seemed alive, as if it was breathing with them, following them. "Jack," Emma whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "do you hear that?" Jack stopped and listened. For a moment, there was nothing but the wind rustling through the trees. Then, faintly, Emma heard it too. A soft, distant whisper. It wasn't a voice. Not really, but more like a murmur that seemed to come from all around them. It was like the trees were talking to each other in a language Emma couldn't understand. "I hear it," Jack said quietly. "It's coming from over there." He pointed to a dark part of the forest, where the trees grew closer together, their branches twisting like claws. Emma's heart skipped a beat. The whispering grew louder now, as if something or someone was calling to them. "Is it the killer?" Emma asked, her voice shaking with fear. Jack shook his head. "No, it's not him. This is something else. Something older." They walked toward the sound, the forest growing even darker with every step. The whispering was getting louder, more urgent, but Emma couldn't make out the words. It was as if the very air around them was filled with secrets, secrets that no one was meant to hear. Suddenly, they reached a small clearing, and Emma gasped. In the middle of the clearing was an old stone altar, covered in vines and moss. It looked ancient, as if it had been there for centuries. The stones were worn and cracked, and there were strange symbols carved into them, symbols that Emma recognized from the coin. Jack approached the altar cautiously, kneeling down to examine it more closely. Emma stayed back, her heart pounding in her chest. This place felt wrong, like something terrible had happened here a long time ago. She couldn't explain it, but the air around the altar felt thick, as if it was charged with energy. Jack ran his fingers over the symbols, muttering to himself, "These symbols, they're not just random markings. They're part of a ritual." "A ritual?" Emma asked, stepping forward. "What kind of ritual?" Jack looked up at her, his face pale. "A very old one, and one that I don't think should have been disturbed." Before Emma could ask anything else, she felt a sudden, sharp coldness in the air. It wasn't just the temperature dropping. It was a feeling of dread, like a shadow had fallen over them. Emma shivered, her skin crawling. "Do you feel that?" she asked, her voice low. Jack stood up quickly, his hand reaching for his gun. "We're not alone," he said, his voice tight with fear. Emma turned around, but she saw nothing. The whispering had stopped, and the woods were completely silent now. But something was wrong. She could feel it deep in her bones. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and her heart raced. They were being watched. "Jack," Emma whispered, "we need to get out of here. Now." Jack didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her away from the altar and back into the safety of the trees. They moved quickly, their feet crunching on the dry leaves and twigs beneath them. But no matter how fast they moved, the feeling of being followed never left. As they ran, Emma could hear footsteps behind them, quick and light, almost like a shadow moving just out of sight. She turned to look, but there was no one there. Her breath caught in her throat. What was it? What was following them? Suddenly, Jack stopped, his body stiffening. Emma nearly crashed into him, her heart racing. "What is it?" she asked breathlessly. Jack's eyes were wide, his face pale. He pointed to the trees ahead of them, where something moved between the trunks. Emma followed his gaze and froze. There, standing just beyond the trees, was a figure. A man, or at least it looked like one. His face was hidden in the shadows, but his eyes glowed faintly, like two burning coals in the dark. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The figure didn't move, but she could feel his gaze, cold and unsettling, piercing her to her very core. "We need to go," Jack said, his voice barely a whisper. They turned and ran, but the figure didn't follow. Instead, it stood still, watching them, its glowing eyes never leaving them. Emma didn't dare look back, but she could feel the weight of its stare on her back, pressing her forward. When they finally reached the edge of the woods, Emma couldn't breathe. The quiet was almost worse than the noise. The stillness felt unnatural, as if the whole world had held its breath while they escaped. Jack stopped, panting, and looked around. "We're safe for now," he said, though his voice lacked confidence. "But whatever that was, it's still out there. And it won't stop until it gets what it wants." Emma stared at him, her mind racing. What had they just encountered? And what was that thing in the woods? Jack's words echoed in her mind, and she knew one thing for sure. Whatever was happening in these woods was far from over. Part 5. The Heart of the Forest. Emma and Jack stood at the edge of the woods, both trying to catch their breath. The cool night air felt almost like a relief, but the weight of what they had seen still hung heavily over them. The figure in the woods was not human, and the cold, unsettling feeling had not left them. Emma could not shake the image of those glowing eyes, staring at them from the shadows. She had never felt so afraid in her life. "We need to figure out what's really going on," Emma said, her voice trembling but determined. "We can't just keep running." Jack nodded, his face grim. "I agree. But whatever is out there, it's not something we're ready for." The last words he spoke echoed in Emma's mind. Not something we're ready for. Emma wasn't sure what he meant, but she had the sense that Jack knew more about the dangers in these woods than he was letting on. He had always been a quiet man, but now he seemed almost afraid. She needed to know the truth. "Jack," she said, her voice low, "what did you mean by that? What aren't we ready for?" Jack hesitated, glancing over his shoulder toward the woods. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," he said finally. "I'll believe you," Emma said, stepping closer to him. "You've seen things, haven't you? You know what's going on in these woods." Jack sighed deeply and rubbed his face with his hands, as if the weight of the years was catching up with him. "When I was young, I was called in to investigate a strange case. The people of this town had been hearing whispers, just like you and I heard tonight. It wasn't just a rumor. People started disappearing, and we couldn't find any signs of a killer. There were no tracks, no bodies, nothing. It didn't make sense. And then we found something that changed everything." "What did you find?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack looked at her, his eyes haunted. "A ritual. A curse. Something dark that had been there long before any of us arrived. The people who lived here before us, they worshipped something old and evil. They made a pact with it, and in return the forest protected them. But it also demanded something in return: blood. Every year, it would take someone. If the town didn't give it what it wanted, the curse would grow stronger. Emma shuddered. A curse? You mean the killer isn't a person? Jack shook his head. No. The killer is something much older. The killings are a part of the ritual, a way to keep the forest's dark power from destroying the town. But it's been a long time since anyone followed the old rules. The town has changed, and the curse has started to come back. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Everything Jack was saying sounded insane, but there was something in his eyes that made her believe him. He wasn't just telling a story. He was warning her. So what do we do now? Emma asked, her voice steady, though her hands were shaking. How do we stop this? Jack looked at her with a sad expression. We don't. We can't. The only way to stop it is to give it what it wants. But how? How do we give it what it wants without more people dying? Emma asked, almost desperate. Jack shook his head again. I don't know. I've tried before. I've tried to stop it, but I wasn't strong enough. And now it's worse. It's getting stronger, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. Emma clenched her fists, trying to stay calm. She wasn't going to give up. There has to be another way. We can't just let people die because of some curse. Jack stared at her for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Finally, he spoke again, quieter this time. I think I know where the answer is. But it's going to be dangerous. Where? Emma asked. The heart of the forest, Jack said, his voice low and serious. The place where the ritual was started. It's hidden deep within the woods, where no one dares to go. That's where the curse began, and it's where it can end. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She knew Jack was right. If they wanted to stop this, they would have to face whatever was waiting for them in the heart of the forest. We'll go together, Emma said firmly, her resolve strengthening. We'll find a way to stop this. Jack nodded, a faint look of respect crossing his face. I've been avoiding it for years, but if you're willing to face it, so am I. They stood there for a moment, both knowing what lay ahead. The forest behind them was dark and silent, as if it was watching them. The whispering from before had stopped, but the feeling of being followed was still there, pressing on them. Let's go, Jack said, his voice steady now. They turned and walked back toward the woods. The air felt heavier this time, as if the forest itself was trying to keep them out. Emma felt the tension building inside her, but she refused to turn back. They had come this far, and they couldn't stop now. The path into the woods was even darker than before. The trees seemed to close in around them, blocking out the little light that remained. Emma could hear the sound of her own breathing, quick and shallow, as if her body knew what was at stake. They didn't speak much as they walked. There was nothing to say. They both knew the dangers that lay ahead. Every step they took seemed to lead them deeper into the unknown. The trees were thick, their branches tangled in a way that made it hard to see what lay ahead. The ground was soft and uneven, and Emma had to watch every step she took to avoid tripping. After what felt like hours, they reached a small clearing. The air felt colder here, and the trees around them seemed to be taller, darker. In the center of the clearing stood a large, gnarled tree. Its roots spread wide, and its branches twisted like claws, reaching out to the sky. "This is it," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma felt a sense of dread wash over her. The tree seemed ancient, as if it had been here long before any of them. Its dark, twisted branches reached out like a warning. "Now what?" Emma asked, her voice shaky. Jack stepped forward, his hand reaching into his pocket. He pulled out the coin. "We need to make an offering. This is the key to breaking the curse." Emma stared at the coin in his hand. "An offering? But to what?" Jack looked at her, his eyes grim. "To whatever is in this forest. We don't know what it is, but it's been here for centuries, and it will take what it wants." Part 6. The final confrontation. Emma and Jack stood in the clearing, facing the ancient tree. The air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. The coin Jack held in his hand gleamed faintly in the moonlight, its surface etched with strange symbols that Emma couldn't understand. Her heart raced as she stared at the twisted tree, its branches like long, clawed fingers reaching for the sky. "Are you sure about this?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't know what they were about to do, but everything in her screamed that this place wasn't right. The energy in the air felt wrong, heavy, and cold. Jack nodded slowly. "This is the only way, Emma. If we don't do this, the curse will keep growing. More people will die. The forest, the darkness, it won't stop until it gets what it wants. We have to offer something to end it. This coin is a part of the ritual, and we need to give it to the tree." Emma felt a shiver run through her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had come this far. There was no turning back now. She looked at the coin in Jack's hand. "What happens if we give it the coin? Will the curse stop?" Jack looked down at the coin in his palm. "I hope so. I'm not sure, but this coin is what's tied to the curse. If we can complete the ritual, maybe it will be enough to break it." Emma took a deep breath. "Then let's do it." Jack stepped forward, walking slowly towards the tree. Emma followed close behind, her footsteps barely making a sound on the soft, damp ground. As they approached the tree, Emma felt a strange sensation, like something was watching them, something old and powerful. The branches of the tree seemed to sway, even though there was no wind. The tree's bark was rough and dark, covered in patches of moss, and the roots twisted into the ground like snakes. It looked as though it had been here for centuries, its branches reaching out to trap anyone who dared come too close. Jack stopped in front of the tree, his face tense. He raised the coin in his hand, and Emma watched as he held it out toward the tree. The coin shimmered faintly, and for a moment, the ground beneath them seemed to tremble. The tree's branches creaked as if it was waking up from a long, deep sleep. "Here it is," Jack muttered, his voice low. "The offering." He dropped the coin into a small hollow in the tree's trunk, where the bark was split open. The moment the coin touched the tree, a cold wind blew through the clearing, sending a chill through Emma's body. The branches of the tree shook violently, and a deep, rumbling sound filled the air, like the earth itself was groaning in pain. Emma took a step back, her heart pounding. She looked around, but the woods seemed darker than ever. The trees loomed like shadows, and the air felt thick, as if it was pressing down on them. "Jack," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "What's happening? What did we do?" But Jack didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the tree, and Emma followed his gaze. From the hollow in the tree where the coin had fallen, a dark mist began to seep out, swirling around them. The mist moved like smoke, swirling in the air, and Emma felt a sense of dread wash over her. Suddenly, the mist started to take shape. Slowly, it formed into a figure, a tall, shadowy form with glowing eyes. Emma gasped, stepping back in fear. The figure was tall and thin, its features unclear but its eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. It seemed to float just above the ground, moving closer to them. Jack stepped forward, his expression grim. "It's here," he said, his voice low. "The thing that's been behind all of this." Emma could feel her heart racing in her chest. The figure in front of them was not human, not even close. It was something else, something ancient, something powerful. She could feel its presence, its darkness, like a heavy weight pressing on her chest. "What is it?" Emma whispered, her voice shaky. She had seen many things during her time as a sheriff, but this was different. This was beyond anything she had ever encountered. Jack didn't look away from the figure. "It's the spirit of the forest, the one that was worshipped long ago. The people who lived here before, they made a deal with it, and it has been waiting ever since. It feeds on fear, on the darkness inside people's hearts. It uses the killings to grow stronger, to keep its power alive." Emma's mind was racing. She had never heard anything like this before, but she could sense the truth in Jack's words. The figure before them was not just a creature. It was a force, a powerful and evil force that had been lying dormant in the forest for years, waiting for the right moment to rise again. "What do we do now?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do we stop it?" Jack turned to her, his eyes filled with a deep, sad understanding. "There's only one way. We have to destroy the tree. The tree is the source of its power. If we destroy the tree, the spirit will lose its hold on this place, and the curse will end." Emma nodded, her heart pounding. She didn't know how they were going to destroy the tree, but she had no other choice. The spirit in front of them was not going to let them go. It was already beginning to move, the dark mist swirling around it, ready to attack. How do we destroy it? Emma asked urgently. What do we need to do? Jack looked around, his gaze searching the clearing. Then, his eyes settled on something. The old, gnarled roots of the tree. The roots, he said quickly. If we can sever the roots, we can kill the tree. The roots are where its power comes from. We have to destroy them before it's too late. Without waiting for Emma to respond, Jack pulled out a large, rusty knife from his belt and ran toward the tree. He plunged the knife into the ground, hacking at the roots with all his strength. Emma rushed to help, grabbing a large branch from the ground and swinging it at the roots, trying to break them apart. The spirit, sensing what they were doing, let out an angry howl, its glowing eyes flashing brighter. The ground beneath them trembled as the figure lunged forward, sending a wave of dark energy toward them. Emma felt the blast of energy hit her, pushing her backward. She stumbled but managed to keep her footing. Jack wasn't so lucky. He fell to the ground, the knife slipping from his hand. The spirit was getting stronger, more aggressive. Jack! Emma shouted, rushing to his side. She grabbed the knife and stood between Jack and the spirit, ready to fight. She didn't know how much time they had, but she knew one thing for sure. They couldn't give up. The battle for the town, for their lives, was happening right here, right now. That's the end of the story. If you enjoyed the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more exciting tales. Check out our other videos and share your thoughts in the comments. Stay tuned for the next adventure. Thanks for watching.